I am a student.
I am an activist.
I am a trans female. I am a daughter.
I am mixed race.
I'm a trans man.
I'm an actor.
I am me.
I am me.
I am me.
I am me.
I am a lover.
I used to be a fighter. I am not too young to understand.
I am the future.
We are the future.
I don't have anything to prove to anyone.
I know who I am.
I know who I am.
I know who I am.
I need you to try to understand.
Ask me what my gender pronouns are, no matter what I look like on the outside.
I need you to be an ally with me.
Ally is a verb, not a noun.
I need you to watch this video so we don't have to be scared.
I need you to know that we should be in this together.
You can make a difference. Even one voice helps.
This video was created to help you be a better ally to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth. First, we're going to help you learn and understand the differences between the three basic concepts of gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. Through stories from young people and adult advocates, you'll learn more about the challenges that LGBTQ youth face. Finally, we'll provide you with a checklist that will guide you through important ways that you can participate in acts of allyship for LGBTQ youth. Let's begin with a little bit about the challenges that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, or LGBTQ, youth face. Many LGBTQ youth are happy and thrive during their adolescent years. Going to a school that creates a safe and supportive learning environment for all students and having caring and accepting parents are especially important. This helps all youth succeed in school and maintain good physical and mental health. However, some LGBTQ youth are more likely than their heterosexual peers to experience difficulties in their lives and school environments, such as violence. Most LGBTQ students experience some form of discrimination at school. Did you know that in New Mexico, over half of our LGBTQ students are feeling unsafe at school? And because of that, each month, 15% of our lesbian, gay, and bisexual students are missing school? We also know that in New Mexico, our lesbian, gay, and bisexual students are bullied twice as much. When we look at the juvenile justice system, we see that LGBTQ youth are represented at a rate close to 3 times higher than their percentage in the general population, and a staggering 40% of girls in juvenile detention identify as LGBTQ. Across the nation, suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. On top of that, lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. Nearly half of young transgender people have seriously thought about taking their lives, and a quarter report having made a suicide attempt. Here in New Mexico, 8% of straight youth have attempted suicide, but 32% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth have attempted. This means 1 in 3 of our lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth in New Mexico have attempted suicide. In the U.S., up to 1.6 million youth experience homelessness each year. The statistics for LGBTQ youth are even more shocking, as this group represents up to 40% of all young people experiencing homelessness. Considering that LGBTQ youth represent an estimated 7% of the total youth population, these numbers are disproportionately high.
I mean, the most recent challenge I really faced was when I was actually in the system, locked up in the system, and they accused me of writing a note to somebody, like a girl, because of course I had to be in the girls' unit. And I always felt like they were singling me out, even though like maybe all those girls identified as being gay or bisexual, but I was the one pointed out because I was the one that looked the most like it.
I still knew I was lying to myself, and I was just so depressed, and it got to the point where I was almost suicidal. So I just decided that I need to live a life true to myself and not be living a lie anymore. I need to stop living to where I wanted to die, because that's not a life worth living. So I decided to come out to myself first, and that was the most difficult
Another big challenge was my family and having them to come to terms with what was really going on from such a young age, because transgender, transsexual, those things weren't ever mentioned back then. It was always just strictly gay, lesbian, bi, sexual orientation. So when I presented them the material from my professional healthcare providers, they were still very skeptical in my role and my decision. They thought, oh, well, you're too young to know what you want or who you are. But it was just all these puzzle pieces that were just scattered throughout my life that we just had to pick up one by one and piece it all together.
Being a young person comes with immense challenges, from bullying and school to finding themselves and becoming confident with their place in the world. Our youth come to us with not just one identity, but layers or intersections of identity. Some of these identities, like gender and sexual orientation, come with additional challenges caused by societal discrimination, harassment, and bias. This increases the risk for these youth to a critical level. Therefore, we all have a tremendous responsibility to support our young people to be authentic to their true identity. We're at an important crossroads where our every action can help or hurt a young person as they create connections and identify the supports in their lives. Gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation are often confused, but in fact are three different concepts. Let's learn more about what they mean. Gender identity refers to a person's deeply felt identification as male, female, or some other gender. This may or may not correspond to the sex assigned to them at birth. Gender expression refers to all of the external characteristics and behaviors that are defined in society as either masculine or feminine, such as dress, grooming, mannerisms, speech patterns, and social interactions. This is what an individual chooses to show the world. Sexual orientation refers to a person's physical or emotional attraction to someone. This can be towards the same and/or different genders. Within these three concepts, there is some important terminology. Let's begin with some general terms and work from there. There are many terms used to describe the LGBTQ community, so don't get overwhelmed. We are about to walk through some of those terms in this video. And if you forget or hear a new term, don't worry, you can always Google it. Terms evolve and change over time, and young people sometimes like to create new terms to define themselves. So remember to respect their identity and allow the young person you are working with the space to define and express themselves. Let's start with how we refer to the community as a whole. LGBTQ is the most common way this community is referred to. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning. The plus is sometimes added to be inclusive of additional terms such as pansexual, asexual, intersex, genderqueer, two-spirit, and more. Gay or queer are sometimes used as umbrella terms as well. Historically, queer was used in a derogatory manner, and there are some folks to whom the word queer still carries a strong negative connotation and can be triggering. However, more recently, this term has been embraced and reclaimed by parts of the LGBTQ community, especially youth. We suggest respecting others' use of this term, but if it makes you uncomfortable, simply use another descriptor, such as LGBTQ+. Sexual orientation refers to who someone is physically or emotionally attracted to. Common terms that individuals use to describe their sexual orientation include straight, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. Let's clarify a few you may not have heard of. While bisexual refers to someone who is attracted to both men and women, pansexual is similar, but does not limit one's attraction and is open to all genders and identities. Someone who is not attracted to anyone may choose the term asexual. And while queer is often used as an umbrella term, many individuals embrace the term queer as an identity. Now let's talk about gender identity. Transgender, or trans, are broad terms for people whose gender identity, expression, or behavior is different from those typically associated with their assigned sex at birth. For example, someone who is assigned female at birth but identifies as male may label themselves as transgender. It's important to note that transgender is correctly used as an adjective, not a noun. Thus, transgender people is appropriate, but transgendered or transgenders is viewed as disrespectful. So you would not say, John is transgendered. Instead, say John is transgender. Of course, this is only if it's appropriate to disclose John's identity. Although the term transsexual is still sometimes used today, typically transgender is more accepted. By using transgender instead, you are recognizing that it is not necessary for any surgical or medical procedures to take place for one to be respected as their true felt gender identity. Cisgender, or non-transgender, is a relatively new term that is used to describe someone whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. For example, someone who is assigned female at birth and identifies as female is cisgender. If you're wondering where this term comes from, the prefix cis is Latin, meaning on this side of, whereas trans means on the other side of. This term is important because before its introduction, the problematic word normal was used when referencing non-transgender people. Cisgender is now a complementary term to transgender. In our society, many people identify as male or female, but more and more young people do not want to have to conform or express themselves in just one way. The terms genderqueer, gender neutral, gender nonconforming, and gender expansive are all terms used to describe people whose gender characteristics, behaviors, and/or expression do not conform to traditional, cultural, or societal expectations. This means that they reject gender as just strictly male or strictly female. Some individuals express themselves in a merged version of socially defined masculine and feminine characteristics or neutral characteristics. They may or may not also identify as transgender. One of the most powerful things that you can do as an ally is to ask people what their gender pronouns are. This gives them the power to self-identify and takes the guesswork and assumptions off of us. Gender pronouns commonly used are she, her, hers, he, him, his, or the neutral they, them, theirs. Now that you are aware of some of the terminology, it's important to take note of a few terms that are inappropriate to use. As mentioned before, terminology and language change as new terms or more appropriate terms are developed. Avoid describing being LGBTQ as a lifestyle. This is offensive. While using the term homosexual isn't necessarily wrong, it's not ideal. It can be distancing. There are numerous other terms that feel more welcoming and will help build better relationships and rapport. Given that LGBTQ youth are targeted at higher rates than other youth, it is critical to intervene when you hear derogatory terms such as fag, faggot, dyke, homo, tranny, maricon, and joto. It's important to note that some people do use these terms to describe themselves. However, you should avoid using those terms unless you're referring to your own identity. Our young people have many different identities that intersect beyond gender and sexual orientation. These multiple and layered identities make each individual who they are. Some layers or intersections of identity, such as race, ethnicity, skin color, socioeconomic background, cultural upbringing, family trauma, health or behavioral health diagnosis, disability, or immigration status, may contribute to the risks that youth face. These unique combinations of intersections characterize each youth and may impact each young person differently.
So the intersection of identity is really who we are. It makes up our whole selves. It allows us to be our whole authentic selves. And that's really the place of being an ally, respecting young people, and allowing and creating space for a young person to be their whole authentic self. And when we're honoring the intersection of identity, we're honoring every single aspect of a young person. So they get to show up as whole. They don't have to leave something at the door. They get to show up and they don't have to hide a part of who they are. They get to show up and say, this is who I am, this is my name, these are my pronouns, and I want to be respected.
I think intersectionality has become sort of a buzzword in activism, but it really is important because when people have intersecting oppressed identities, then their outcomes and the disparities, the discrimination and violence that they're at risk for experiencing become very heightened. So for me as a white transgender man who speaks English and has a college degree, I am really in very little danger of encountering any type of street violence. I am not someone who another person would pull their car over to the side of the road to kill because I'm not even visibly trans. But when someone is a transgender woman in a culture like ours that already oppresses women, cisgender women, and also is transgender and is also a person of color, and then you add on anything else like being HIV positive, being a sex worker, being a person who injects substances, that person is at so much more risk for every type of violence, from street level violence to institutional violence, than I am. So intersections really start to count when you look at the outcomes and the violence that people experience.
You know, so it's like I said, like simple things like going to the MVD, and you imagine going into trying to get like your license, and they're like, "Oh, who is this for?" And it's like, it's for me. You know what I mean? Because it says male on my stuff, but obviously I'm not a male. I don't look like a male at all. You know, and so it's really like, that's like really challenging.
Being queer is hard. You know, I go outside every day trying to be myself, and there are always people who don't like that and who make that very clear to me. You know, I've been hurt physically by people, I've been picked on a lot, and I've been just isolated, and I think isolation is the worst.
Well, when she first came out, I may be known of 2 transgenders within our community, other than my daughter. She is the first one to come out within the high school setting. And I think people were very mixed. There were some that were accepting and others that were not so accepting. And they tried throwing it as, this is not our beliefs, this is not our cultural, this is the white man's world. But in reality, before colonization came along, it was known as Two-Spirits, and it was part of our culture, and they were not excluded. They were welcomed into our culture because they played both traditional roles as the men and women in our culture.
Before I started identifying as female, I worked with this program with the Acoma Pueblo because I am Laguna and Acoma. And the director of the program knew me for a very long time, and I don't know how he like felt it some way that I was different, but he started telling me about transgender people in Acoma culture and that they were seen as holy people. And that he had pictures of men in the mantas, which is like the dresses that females wear. And it just made me feel proud to be Native and also to be transgender.
Being a part of the system as a youth, I really felt kind of belittled or judged at the fact that I was interested in the same sex. And I think the staff and my foster parents kind of made it into a huge, like, living joke.
Definitely safety, I would say, is huge, especially with me being so clearly read as being queer. Like, I tend not to go out at night without a friend, even though I know that, like, I could probably defend myself. That doesn't necessarily mean that I want to have to.
I use forms of escapism like drugs, self-mutilation, and just things of that such. I was very self-destructive growing up. From the end of elementary going on, it was always a constant struggle with being what society wanted me to be and pleasing people and pleasing myself. And just trying to find a neutral ground for that was also a big challenge. And then having so many negative coping skills that I acquired growing up, like the cutting, the burning, not eating, just, really punishing myself for being different, and not knowing that I was different, not having a label to be like, this is who I am, was very traumatizing, I'd have to say, because not having a sense of identity, you lose yourself really fast.
When my sister came out, it was traumatic. I mean, she told us that I wasn't allowed to know, even though I knew 4 years before. I mean, she was like packing bags to like leave the state because her friends couldn't find out because it would ruin her reputation. And it was traumatic for a good 3 years straight. Just that topic couldn't be brought up in our house without fights. And, you know, growing up knowing that that's also you, how could you come out knowing that that's going to happen to you also?
Being trans, I think school has been very hard in the, you know, educational kind of system. I mean, it's got to the point where I kind of just decided just to leave school and get my GED. That's kind of like where I'm at right now. And so I am getting my GED this summer. And it's, when I say like with school, it's like simple things like me using the female restroom. Like they wouldn't allow that. Like I would have to use a designated restroom. And they kind of like placed me, you know what I mean? I want to be treated like every other girl in the school.
Ever since from like a young age, you know, going to school in elementary, always being questioned about my expression, the way I move, the way I talk, and just always constantly being judged for just being myself. So I think masking that was a big part of my life and just trying to blend in with society and being able to be normal in a sense.
Even being in school too, like they wouldn't let me identify as the name that I am. They wouldn't unless it was legally changed. And I think that was really hard too, because it's like you're sitting in class and like the teacher's calling and they're calling like my birth name, and it's kind of like embarrassing, you know. And I think schools need to like, and just need to do that more in general, and like they need to have a preferred name, you know what I mean? Because it's just how you feel comfortable and it's who you go as. And yeah, so it's kind of like they almost push me out of school, you know, just because I don't even want to deal with it.
School pushout can be defined as the policies, practices, and procedures that make it more likely for certain students to leave school instead of finish it. LGBTQ+ youth are 3 times more likely to experience criminal justice and school sanctions.
So one of the things that we're most concerned about with LGBTQ youth, especially in the educational environment, is school pushout. And we define school pushout as any number of factors that could cause a student to choose not to be in school, or to not be able to be in school. And so that's also inclusive of any kind of juvenile justice type, systems that may be present on campus.
The students most likely to drop out or be kicked out of school are the most marginalized students in our schools, whether that be because of race, class, disability, gender identity, sexual orientation. The most likely to be kicked out of school. We know that students who do not feel supported at school just don't show up and are far more likely to end up in the system or end up in what we could call survival economies, meaning sex work, drug trade, theft, when there's no one else there for that young person. These things are far more likely to happen.
I was still very messy with my appearance. I didn't care. It was just transition and survive. That was all I knew. I was still in that dark part of my life where I was still using hard substances and mutilating and dabbling in things that were very unhealthy. When my social worker noticed my instabilities, she confronted me directly in a very nurturing way. She just asked me questions, is everything all right? And then they brought up the suspicion of drug abuse. And like, you're so skinny, you're not coming to school, what's going on? And at this point, I was heavily induced on meth. And I was just always using in my house. I never wanted to leave. I had a severe case of agoraphobia, where every time I left my house, I would just break out into panic and just was so worried about what people would think of me, how I presented, just the little tauntings and people who nitpick. It was a lot, so I just would escape and not leave my house.
We know from the GLSENT National School Climate Survey that approximately 85% of LGBTQ youth have experienced verbal harassment in the past year in their school environments. We know that about 30% of our LGBTQ youth have missed a day of school in the past month because they feel unsafe or uncomfortable in their classrooms. And then additionally, the majority of the students that are missing school because they feel unsafe or uncomfortable are not reporting incidences of bullying that they're experiencing because either they're afraid of retaliation or that it's not safe to report those things, or they're afraid that nothing will happen.
When I got really serious saying, like, I want to go on testosterone, I was kind of kicked out of the house. She didn't want to be part of my life. She didn't want me to do anything like that. It's weird because I'm kind of losing my mom. I'm gaining myself, but I'm losing my mom, and I don't really have another parent in my life.
My mom, actually, when I came out as trans, she kicked me out, and I was living in a youth shelter for about a month and a half, and that was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do. You know, imagine just trying to be yourself and just trying to, you know, just live your life and be happy, and then something like that happens. Like, it was a really hard time.
Well, I mean, the experiences of LGBTQ youth in our state are pretty diverse. We definitely have young people who are securely housed and are loved by their families of origin and are doing well in school and are able to access transition-related health care and are being really supported. But again, I think a lot of this is intersectional, and a lot of times we see more difficult outcomes for young people when there are more oppressed identities in play already. And the far side of the bad outcomes is terrifying.
LGB youth who come from highly rejecting families are 8.4 times more likely to have attempted suicide than LGB peers who reported no or lower levels of family rejection.
Now, I want to be really clear that it's not because we are LGBTQ that we attempt suicide. It is not a pathology. The reason this happens is because of how society treats us. And layers of microaggressions are too much for one person to handle. And that's why we're doing this education, so we can educate ourselves and really be a better society, so our LGBTQ youth and community stop feeling like they don't want to be here anymore, and that they can be respected and productive people in our society, because we are.
Microaggressions can be defined as the everyday slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to people in marginalized groups.
So a microaggression is a subtle but still offensive comment or action that can be unintentional, subconscious, that brings down or promotes stereotypes for any marginalized group, gay people, people of color, women, whatever.
Well, I think the first thing about microaggressions is that they are typically defined by the person who is experiencing it. So I think it's really important that, you know, the definition isn't something that's hard and fast, because it could look like something different to me than it does to another person.
If someone comes up to me and calls me some names, some derogatory words having to do with my sexual orientation, it's pretty safe to assume that their intention is to hurt me. If someone says, oh, well, if you really want to be a guy, you need to stop painting your toenails. Is their intention to hurt me? No. Their intention is they think that they're helping me become a better guy. So I think of the first one as an overt act of prejudice or discrimination, and the other one as a microaggression, which comes into this intent versus impact. The intention here was not to hurt me, but the impact was that it did. The intention here was very much to hurt me, and the impact was also that it did. But folks can have really great intentions in saying little tiny comments, and the impact, because those little tiny comments do not exist within a vacuum, they exist within a context of hundreds, if not thousands, of other little tiny comments that build up and actually have a significant impact on someone's ability to deal with trauma, someone's ability to expand their own resiliency when coming up against a difficult situation.
Many of the young people you serve have difficult and challenging experiences. When you add the layer of societal stigma and discrimination that LGBTQ youth face, they are even more vulnerable. Whether it's a microaggression, overt harassment, or discrimination, these situations can greatly impact a young person's well-being and their ability to be successful and thrive. As an adult, it is your responsibility to proceed with sensitivity and empathy and provide them the support they need. These young people need you to be their ally.
If an adult wants to be more supportive, I would say just let the young person talk. If they have questions, answer them. And if you have questions, maybe think about Googling it.
Just open your ears. Like, seriously, just sit there. Don't even, and it sounds blunt, but don't even talk. Like, listen to what they have to say. Like, if they finally have enough strength to sit there and open up and share their feelings with you, that is already one of the biggest steps ever.
I feel like listening is a big thing. You know, I don't need someone to solve my problems, but sometimes I just want someone to listen to me for once, because I've gone a very long time feeling like I haven't been listened to.
When you confront someone and ask them, be open to anything they have to say. And if you don't know what to say, just being able to be like, wow, you know, that is something, I don't know what to say to that, but thank you for letting me know, because I couldn't imagine like what is really going on. But for you to be able to give me an idea, that is awesome.
I think being an ally is just being someone there to listen and to relate to what you have to say and to try and like understand what you're going through and help be there for you and support you with your transitions to whatever it is you're doing, and just try and help make the process a little bit easier.
Whether you understand the situation or not, you need to be able to have an emotional support. Just let them know that you're there for them. Let them know that you're able to listen. Listening is such a big deal, because not everyone has answers, not everyone is able to do something, but someone that's able to listen to another person and accept what's going on is probably the greatest gift someone can be given.
But I need you to stand up for me when I need you. I need you to be there when it gets tough and not to just walk away.
One of my best interactions was with a person who I did not get their identity. And this is me as a queer trans person. I just didn't get it. And they looked at me and I said, you know, I just don't understand what you're trying to do. Does this mean this? Does this mean that? And I was asking lots of questions, and they looked at me and they said, maybe it's not your job to understand. Maybe it's just your job to support me. And I went, oh my goodness, you're so right. Cheers to you, young person. That was brilliant. Yes, you're right. It's not my job to understand you right now. It's my job to support you. I don't need to understand the intricacies of your identity to support you and be there for you. And I think that's something that seems like not much, but has an incredible impact.
I feel hurt when you assume my sexual orientation. I need you to respect me and ask me.
I feel humiliated when I'm misgendered. I need you to refer to the woman that I really am.
I need you to see the whole me, not just one part.
I feel hurt and ashamed when you call me the wrong name. I need you to respect my name and pronouns.
I feel small when I reach out and nobody reaches back. I need you to listen to me.
So adults can do a lot of things to be more inclusive and supportive allies. For me, the number one thing that I always recommend and talk about is to be more conscious of your language. So are you using language that is creating possibility for identities and opening things up to allow youth to self-identify? Or are you using language that is more limiting and putting youth into like a binary system of male or female instead of saying, go and talk with your mom and your dad? Are there other ways that we can say that? Like go home and talk with your family, because our families ultimately look very different.
To make things better, you can get involved and you can just educate yourself, really. It's so much more than just being there. You have to be an active part of it. You have to educate yourself and educate those around you. And if you really teach people about it, then not only are you growing, but you're helping other people grow, and then you grow together and you really make a difference.
Constantly educate yourself on any issue. Like, you don't know everything just because you're an older person. Take a step back and really acknowledge and validate that these young people probably know what's best for themselves, and that you're really there just to help guide them in that, but always follow their lead. Don't ever project any of your values or any of your identities onto young people, because they're still becoming their own person, and you shouldn't be the one that makes them who they are. They were born being who they are, and that's not something that can ever be changed. So just really follow the lead of a young person.
And a lot of times I think with young people, we just discount their realities as if they aren't self-aware or are able to articulate themselves to us when they really are. And they tell us what we need to know, and we just don't want to listen to them. So I think when we can partner with them and elevate their voices and be part of the advocacy and the effort to make that change, that's also important, is how do we partner together? And not just jump in front of them and speak for them, but how do we bring them into the conversation and lift up their voices?
I'm going to go back to the piece of asking questions. And you may be turned away, like that may happen. You may be like, I don't want to talk about it. This is dumb, whatever. You may get that. But if you show an interest over and over, a young person's going to notice, because as much as a young person notices that you don't pay attention, they notice that you do. And so I think that's key right there, that as adults, we listen, and then we ask questions, and we listen some more, right? And then take that in and see how we're maybe part of it, part of the problem, or part of making a change with them.
I do think that all of these systems interlock in a lot of ways, and that people who are systems affected, you see going through lots of the different types of systems you just named, facilities of recovery from addiction, school systems, foster care, even all of those things are very similar, I think, in the idea of how we would improve those systems, if it's possible to do so, I think would follow a similar model of first just talking to people who are affected by those systems and finding out what's working and not working for them. Making sure everyone at every level of the organization is educated is a big part of it too. We have a lot of stories of places, facilities where people go in and maybe the administration is pretty well educated and is prepared to do a good job with our individual constituents, but the person who staffs the front desk or answers the phone doesn't have access to that same information and unwittingly do a terrible job with a trans person, but they didn't even mean to. They didn't have the information to do better. So making sure that everyone is involved in that type of discussion and not just the people, at the top.
Yeah, it's the worst when you go into when you're trying to apply for a job or you're trying to do something and it says male or female. And it's like there should be other, because this is not what people just identify as.
So imagine if you were a young person coming in and having to fill out paperwork for the first time. First time you are coming into a system that is very strange and new to you, and you're a little scared and nervous. And you come in and you fill out the paperwork and it doesn't have a gender marker that belongs to you. So a trans youth may feel a microaggression the moment they begin to fill out an intake form because they're not reflected on that document. And I know all of our organizations have protocol, we have procedures and policies and intake forms, but it is okay to look at those and really improve those forms. As we're improving ourselves, as we're educating ourselves, we have to make sure our policies and procedures are following that so that we can keep the highest standard for our young people.
Again, so if I see someone being picked on, stopping it immediately and really questioning people's stereotypes about things. I think that opens possibility. Is because when a student sees you stop that immediately, they're like, oh, that's not going to be tolerated in this classroom. So I'm safe to try on that identity. I'm safe to talk in the way that feels comfortable to me or that feels natural to me, because someone picking on me for that is not going to be tolerated here.
I think a big part of being an ally is not only trying to sympathize, but empathize. And sympathy is just saying, wow, I see you're struggling and that sucks. But empathy is more, I see you're struggling, let me help. I see you're struggling, how does that feel? And being an ally is all about empathy. If you can understand where someone's coming from, that's what makes you want to be an ally.
I think the first thing that people need to know about allyship is that, and being an ally, is that it's not a noun, it's a verb. So we define allyship based off of action. And what are you doing to show up? And yeah, exactly, not just doing your job, because that's already the expectation. Allyship goes above and beyond that.
There's a lot of pressure behind being an ally. That means you're 100% on, and if you mess up, that identity is taken from you. Engaging in acts of allyship means that pressure is a little, and it leaves room to make mistakes and learn from them and not make those mistakes again. And I came to one of our big meetings and said, hey, when we do introductions today, can we do gender pronouns? And folks were, wait, you want us to do what? I said, our gender pronouns, he, him, his, she, her, hers. They're like, yeah, I mean, we know what they are, but why do you want us to do this? I said, well, I don't want to make any assumptions about how anyone identifies in the room. And it was really fascinating to go around the room and have everyone say, for very possibly the first time, their gender pronouns, or be asked to say their gender pronouns. And we had a conversation about how it's assumed that we only do these things in LGBTQ communities, and those are the only spaces in which that's important. And they reflected that doing this in a space that was not LGBTQ specific was fascinating and felt like an invitation into a conversation that they hadn't had before. And having that moment to say, oh, how would I answer that question? Also gives you that moment to say, oh, other people are asked this question all the time, or assumptions are made about their identities all the time.
If you're an adult, or even if you're a young person, and you hear somebody use the wrong pronoun, you cannot call yourself an ally if you don't call them out.
So if I'm going in front of a classroom and I know that the identities of these students in this classroom are vastly different than my own, it means that I'm going to look inside and say, okay, what biases might I have about these students of my own? Because we all have them. How could that prevent this student from connecting to me?
If your job is to lift up and support young people, then you should be educating yourself, and you should be hyper aware of the things that you're saying.
Ultimately, when youth hear the silence, they hear that it's not okay. That's what they're learning and they're taking away. So then at the organization level, we need to have the conversation started and continued.
We really need to take a step back and allow that young person to be their full, authentic self while we figure it out.
Youth have a voice. The young people will continue to have a voice, and they're here, they're not going anywhere. We want them to stay. That it's important to ask questions, but not tokenize, to build relationship with our young people, and to also seek their own resources outside of young people, to know how to do that, to ask an organization or even go online.
I'm an ally because I believe there should be change in the world. I'm an ally because that's what's right.
So in review, here is a list of ways that you can participate in acts of allyship for LGBTQ+ youth. Ask questions, but also educate yourself. Use correct names and pronouns. If you don't know, ask. Listen to youth. Take them seriously. Stand up and defend LGBTQ+ youth. Interrupt bullying and harassment. Stop all derogatory comments. Use non-assumptive, neutral language. Display LGBTQ+ material and resources. And remember, ally is a verb, not a noun.
I feel protected when you call me by the right name and pronouns.
I feel hopeful for the future when you ask questions.
I feel empowered when you raise me up.
I feel supported when you stand up for me when I'm not there.
I feel safe when you defend queer and trans youth.
To learn more about supporting LGBTQ+ youth, please visit the CYFD website, or if you'd like to see other videos and learn about upcoming trainings, call 505-827-8008. I Am Me, Understanding the Intersections of Gender, Sexuality, and Identity, is proud to be the silver medalist for SAMHSA's 2016 Excellence in Community Communications and Outreach Award in the category of Professionals.